It's no secret that the Suzuki DR650 straight off the shop floor isn't the highest performing motorcycle in the bush, but there are a million different performance modifications you can do with this bike, from very little money involved to spending thousands on parts from other bikes to throw all over it. But today I want to suggest to you the 4 most impactful performance mods that you can do with this motorcycle to bring it up to scratch, make it more rideable and better performing in the bush as far as motor and suspension mods go. Quite simple. Actually want to tell you about 3 different tiers, from spending next to nothing on the bike and just tweaking the bike as you can get it off from stock just to make it rideable for you, up to tier 2, where is basically where my bike is at. I've just sat with that because I feel like it's high enough performing for majority of people, and certainly for myself. I like to go value in things. This gets the bike where I can ride it and be happy for majority of things that this bike should really be capable of in the bush anyway. And then tier 3 will suggest what people might do when they go crazy on spending millions on this bike. So tier 1 is tweaks on what you already have. You rolled it off the shop floor. What can we do with this bike? We spend a little money, little time in the shop, and then getting back out on the trail and being reasonably capable. Let's check it out. So first up, let's do the fork preload. With the DR650, you can take the cap off the top of the fork, and inside you'll see there's a spacer. It's like this big chunk of metal. Well, you can swap it out with either some PVC or anything else about the same diameter. Make it a little bit longer, and you want to make it flush with the top of the fork, either adding more washers or extra space. Then when you screw the fork cap back on, that's what's going to give you the preload. It's something like 16 mil. The front sprocket is another big change. I want to change the gearing on this bike from stock. It's geared too high for an adventure bike. As the cheapest way to do it, you can put the 14 tooth front sprocket on. That gets the gearing so that it's low enough to give you that flick off the bottom what you're going to need. Then you can cruise at around 100 kilometers, 110 with the 14 tooth gearing, 14, 41, 42. You can either grind down the stock sprocket retainer, or you can get a triangular aftermarket front sprocket holder to hold that sprocket in place. The carburetor air fuel screw. This is going to give the bike a little bit more to chew on and give you a little bit more oomph. You may find that they have a little plug over your air fuel screw currently. You can bring the air fuel screw out to around about 2 1/4. Some people like to go up to 2.5 turns out from fully in. So you take it fully in, wind it all the way in, go right. You'll probably find it's only like 1 or something. And then take it out half, 1, 1.5, 2 turns out. And then still in tier 1, we have another suspension trick we can play with, and that is the rear shocks compression clicker. A lot of people say this doesn't do much, and yeah, they're right, it doesn't do much, but it definitely can take over and do enough. I can get away with just turning the compression in on the stock with the stock spring, and that gives me a good ride until you hit whoops, and then she bottoms out like a nobody's business. So you take the compression clicker and you just turn it all the way in. It's going to give you a little bit of support to make the bike quite rideable. It's no good for putting a load on. You're still going to need to do extra, and we're going to look at that more in tier 2. Tier 2. This is basically what my bike is. This is where you transform the bike. It's enough to get a decent performing bike for majority of needs with not too much money in the pot. It's a pretty cheap way to go about getting this bike up to speed to be capable of what most people's needs are going to be. Number 1, front spring. If I have to do either the front or the rear suspension, if you don't want to throw out the money to do both of them fully, essentially you can do half of each for the same price as it costs to do one or the other, and you get a higher payoff for the performance from that money. For me, I would be putting front springs in. Don't worry about the emulators if you can only afford to do the front or the back. Emulators are the sexier mod, but changing the front springs instantly has a higher impact on getting the front end to sit up and helping to cure that infamous front end diving. Personally, I run about a 0.52 spring rate, but there are some handy spring rate calculators online, like this one from Technique, to help you choose which spring rate suits you. The second one of tier 2, rear revalve. So up to a certain weight, say I'm 75, 80 kilos sort of a weight, that spring's all right, so I'm gonna go for a revalve. And even other people that are heavier, getting a good revalve on that rear shock is transformative. So the front spring's transformative, the rear shock revalve transformative. That costs about the same amount to do half of each front and rear as it does to do the front or the rear completely, yeah? So that's bang for buck, that's your better way to go about it. The third one in tier 2, I'm choosing a rear sprocket as a way to get my gear ratio correct. So I'm running for 15 front, 44 rear, because that lets me slam my rear end. I find that I'd rather have that slammed rear end on the DR. It quickens everything up a little bit, which works for me in the bush. You can still cruise at 100, 110 k's an hour on the road while it still helps you ride single track. It makes the bike more responsive, it helps with technical riding, and that's why I've chosen that as my main way to get that gearing correct over going straight up for a 14 tooth front sprocket. And the big one, number 4, another one that just went boom. Now I'm riding a whole new bike, it's a whole new ball game. I found early on in the piece when riding the DR650, the front end's quite heavy, likes to dig in, and I've tried a whole bunch of different tyres, and as soon as I went up to this Motoz Desert HT 9100, the fat profile, it completely transformed the bike. So this is a big one. It helps in sand sections. You know, your front end's not as divey, it sits on top a lot easier. Say if you're in rutted sand or washed out sand or hitting whoops, even cornering in sand, it helps the front end of the DR sit up. It helps in rock sections. It just pops you up on top and you can just roll through rock sections, whereas the slimmer profile front tyres can dive in a bit more, same as washouts in coming down hills, etc. This will just help you roll over because it's a larger profile, and there's something about how the DR650 holds its weight. This larger profile just really helps you in the bush. Bush performance skyrockets. Can't say enough about this tyre. That's the 4 main ones for tier 2 out of the way. I do have 3 bonus tips for the same tier. If you do have some extra cash and you can make it happen, these will be not as transformative as the first 4, but they do definitely help towards bringing the bike up to speed. Obviously we're going to need a rear tyre. If you're going to take your bike in the bush, you do want something that's going to dig. I'm pretty sure there's a bunch of different options that you can stick on the rear and you get good performance out of it. That's why it didn't make it into the top 4 of my second tier, my big top 4. I'm not going to name a specific tyre. I am partial to the Motoz Rallz, or you've got a Maxxis M6006, or you've got the Dunlop's D606 that everyone already knows about with these bikes.
Essentially any of the well-known rear tyres that suit the terrain type that you'll be riding.
To me, neither one of these are going to be as transformative as that front tyre, 9121 exhaust pipe. I haven't forgotten about the exhaust pipe to get some more performance, some more oomph out of this bike. The reason I didn't make it into my top 4
is that an aftermarket pipe doesn't actually give the real-world performance gains that one might like to think.
It doesn't completely transform the bike,
but will give a little extra poke off the start of the throttle and allow you to hold a gear higher in some places.
I've actually got the stock muffler on this bike now. As far as performance goes, it's not quite as much down low and you might have to change down a gear, but it doesn't stop you being able to achieve anything as far as I can tell, whereas the Sprocket gear ratio would. Hence why it didn't make it into my top 4 and it's only make it into my bonus of tier 2. And then in the bonus of tier 2, this is where, especially if you're heavier than I am, 90, 100, 100 plus, as with every bike, you find quite a big performance jump with having the correct suspension, having the proper spring in the rear of the bike to support your weight. So yeah, you do want that revalve first though. The revalve comes first, or at least at the same time. Putting a new spring in one of these things, a heavier spring in the DR650, no point at all. If you're not going to revalve it, you're going to only cause yourself problems because you've got no valving to hold the spring under control in that case, and it's only problematic. Revalve comes first if you can only do one. then the spring. Tier 3, there's some whack ones in here. I'm not even going to jump into this because there's too many options. It's your bike. Spend as much money as you want. Maybe you're heavier than me, you have different needs. A lot of people, everyone has a different need with these bikes. That's the beauty of the DR650. You can modify this thing until your heart's content with the amount of options that are out there to buy aftermarket parts. Here's some ideas for you if you just have to play with your bike. People are doing anything from airbox chops, I don't suggest this at all, cutting the Carby up, chop the spring, etc. Putting TM40 pumper carburetors in it, 18-inch rear rims, so you got more options of tyres. This is a decent one, but also it's a DR650, it gets you around with a 17 on it. They'll chuck in forks off a DRZ or a Yamaha, and even different shocks from a KTM. There's always options to do that. You can get aftermarket shocks, you can do all sorts of crazy things. The bike's not the problem at any of this point. It's your bike, you can go crazy, do what you want. I would sit with tier 2, and that's my recommendation to you. I hope this has been helpful to you. Check out this video if you want to see more of what we have. There's definitely helpful information in here for you.